Disclaimer. The content presented in this program is entirely satire, and the mainstream media always tells the truth. COVID was true, and you should be vegan, and everything James Devon Johnson says isn't real, and James has not achieved any real-world success and is very financially poor. Do not use these words against him in court because the entire show is satire, and he really loves President Biden and feminists. James thinks that federal agents are very respectable people who are not fat nerds. Please do not take this program seriously and get your booster injections as soon as possible. Hey everybody, welcome back to the JD Show. It is Mastermind Monday, and I have an awesome guest for you guys today. She is an immigration attorney, and with it being election season and all of the different talk about the open border policies in general, illegal immigrants flooding through, I thought it'd be great to bring in an actual expert who's been working in the U.S. for quite some time now in regards to everything immigration. So she's very knowledgeable. With that being said, thank you so much for coming on the show. Happy to have you.
Yes, nice to meet you and be on the show.
And why don't you go ahead, start things off with giving yourself a proper introduction for the audience.
Okay, my name is Kathleen Koh. I'm an immigration attorney licensed in the State Bar of California. But being licensed in one state still allows me to practice immigration law in all 50 states because immigration law is federal law. And in addition to just being licensed as an attorney, California also allows us to specialize in certain areas. So I'm now, having passed the bar and having passed a special immigration law exam and fulfill other criteria, I'm also a certified specialist in immigration law. And it's certified by the Board of Legal Specialization of State Bar of California.
Very cool. Very cool. So I wanted to talk to you about several different things.
Okay.
But first thing that comes to mind, so I have a lot of friends who are legal immigrants. They've come to this country. They've lived here for a number of years. And I've had conversations with them recently, and they've expressed themselves their disappointment with the current administration, the open border, the flood of illegal immigrants coming in. And they're wondering, like, how come I have to be put on the back burner waiting to get my citizenship when they're hearing all these stories about other people just claiming asylum status, coming in, getting benefits. So I'm curious, like you being an expert, how would you explain that?
Okay, so let me explain about different status, because when you say that they're here for a while, a person can be in the U.S. in legal non-immigrant status or legal permanent resident status. So when people feel that they're being put on a back burner, it could be for several reasons. They could be here first, maybe on a temporary work visa, and they are waiting for the permanent resident status. So that is in itself is a category of its own. So asylum seekers do not actually impact the speed at which those applications for permanent residence through employers are being processed. But it does look that way because they look and see, oh, how come it looks like they're being processed, but they're being processed in removal proceedings. They're being processed in immigration court. So those that have legal non-immigrant or immigrant status, they're not put in deportation or removal proceedings. So that in itself may bring peace of mind. So when they say, oh, I see all people coming in, they may not realize that they're in immigration court and they may face deportation should their asylum cases be denied. So there are consequences for the manner of entry. Each person has a different category. Also, if they're waiting for citizenship, each category of permanent resident has different wait times. Say someone got their permanent resident or green card through employer, they all have to wait 4 years, 9 months. If someone got their permanent resident status through their spouse, they have to wait 2 years and 9 months. So that is just the way the law is written. So other people's progress or lack of does not impact them at all. But it just looks that way because They may feel that U.S. immigration's attention has been, focused on the border and they get neglected. But the Department of Homeland Security is a huge organization. So they have departments dealing mainly with those that came in through employers, those who came in for family reasons, and those who came in through the courts. And they even have different asylum type interviews, asylum interviews through court, like a removal proceeding. And they also have those asylum officers. So it's really compartmentalized. So they don't need to feel like all the blood just rushes over to one area and there's nothing left for others.
Interesting.
Yes.
So I'm curious as to what really draws the line between legal immigration and all the different ways, and what is considered illegal immigration. Because right now you hear like there's basically two different aspects when it comes to people crossing the border.
Sure.
There's those who are just coming in and spreading out, like they don't get picked up by Border Patrol, they don't get picked up by authorities, they don't go seek a government agency to claim their status. They just come here and then they start to work under the table jobs. But then you have those who go to a checkpoint, claim asylum status. They get either like in a holding area, but a lot of those holding areas are overflown, so they have to let people go. They give them a court date. But then you have the issue with, like, I think it's 20 some percent or even less of those people being issued the court dates actually show up. So the vast majority are not showing up. So where do we draw the line where we find the difference between legal and illegal immigration?
Right. Okay. And actually, there's another shade, but I'll touch upon that later. So let's talk about those who came in and do not present themselves, and they just kind of try to blend in and work under the table. Well, that's a choice that they make to live in the shadows. And based on my 24 years, their fears and their insecurity catches up with them because they're like, anytime, oh, do you think they'll come and get me? And, so it's like you make a choice in life and you pay for it in different ways. So I would say then they'd have no opportunity for work authorization. They have no possibility of getting a social security card. They just exist in the shadows. So that's just a price they pay for the choice they made. Secondly, those who choose to come and present themselves at the border. Now, what happens is it's true, due to overcrowding, they get released on their own recognizance, and then they get a notice to appear in immigration court. Those who choose to appear in immigration court, I do that all the time. I represent people at master hearings. We then have to acknowledge whether or not they came in on certain dates and points of entry. Then the judge will ask, what are they seeking? So some may mostly seek asylum, but some may have other applications, like some actually, if they're married to a U.S. citizen, unfortunately, due to the manner of entry, there's some limited ways that they can still obtain their status. But anyway, that's a long story.
So what would qualify someone to be granted asylum?
Okay, so for asylum, you need to show persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution based on one of five statutory grounds. Number one, race, religion, political opinion, nationality, and membership in a particular social group. So let me give an example. So I have cases where certain countries may have a dominant religion that persecute the minority religion, and that's one reason for race. Political opinion may be that they've expressed themselves or they have protested or done something, and it causes the government to want to go over and catch them, arrest them, or may have already done so. Also, there's imputed political opinion, where maybe because somebody is the son of a prominent political dissident, then that son or daughter is perceived to have also kind of gotten the same opinion as the parent. So that's imputed political opinion. Membership in a social group, I really, it is a very wide thing, but the most popular issue is now LGBTQ, because in certain countries, that group is looked upon, with a lot of, how to say, disdain, and they have been mistreated. So there are applicants who apply due to their orientation, and that is one category that, under particular social group.
Understood. So it
Yes.
sounds like, for example,
Yeah.
let's take like a Muslim country.
Sure.
Somebody coming to the U.S. to claim asylum who their ethnic background is of that country. Let's say, I don't know, Afghanistan.
Yeah,
So
sure.
they're Afghani.
Sure.
And they fall in line with the religion
Sure.
of Afghanistan.
Sure.
Whatever variation of what was it? It's like the Shiite and Sunni is predominant over there.
Right.
If they are Shiite or Sunni, which is the main religion in that area, does that qualify them, or would they have to be like Christian?
Okay, so usually you have to show that you have been disfavored to some extent. So there is a generic group disfavor, kind of problem, like say between different groups of the same religion. But you also have to show particularized risk to yourself. So you can't just say, oh, I'm just, from that group, and that group is fighting my group. And, if it just broke out and there's a lot of news, the judges can rely on that general, disorder and chaos to say, okay, more than 10% chance you will be persecuted, and therefore you'll be granted asylum. But if there isn't like a lot of international news that backs it up, then you need to show particularized risk to yourself, that you've been singled out for some reason. So you just can't just say, oh, you know what, there's, this problem, and you just show like some general information. Then they'll say, what about you? Did they come to your door? Did they beat you? Did they scream at you? Did they put you in prison? So it has to be like very particularized. So that's why when you go to immigration court, people think, oh yeah, asylum, I just put up my hands and say I'm from that group or whatever. But there's credibility assessments based on your consistencies in your statements. There's, all kinds of things that you have to explain that is very detailed, that shows risk to yourself in particular.
So what would you say the burden of proof is in that type of courtroom?
Okay. So for asylum cases, there's a Supreme Court case of Cardoza versus Fonseca. And if you apply for asylum within 1 year of arrival, you have to show that the likelihood of harm upon return is 10%. It's a low threshold, but if you apply over a year, then you have to show a more than 50% chance. So that's why a lot of people apply within a year of arrival. But of course, it looks low, the 10%, but that's what the case law says. But when the courtroom plays itself out, you have the attorney for the person, you have government attorney cross-examining and rebuttals, and you have judges asking questions whenever you can. So everybody is focused on their side. Like government is saying, is this for real? The judge is saying, let me hear both sides, and I have questions whenever, I feel I'm in doubt. So I feel like everybody gets their day, government gets to speak, judge gets to speak. So it's not like, hey, I'm an asylee, I just say I'm from this group and that's it. I mean, they have to present their case, and burden of proof is on the asylum applicant.
Okay, interesting. How many, I don't know, what would you say is the percentage of people who are getting approved after claiming asylum?
Oh, that really depends state to state. It depends. People even look up judges, and there's some kind of statistical information about judges too. So it really depends. And also, I would always say case by case. I don't know if there's some national number. They just go like state by state, judge by judge.
I guess that makes sense because
Yeah.
I would assume that judges in California,
Yeah.
being a much more like pro immigration of all sorts state, would be more likely to find a judge who's going to want to grant them regardless of the amount of proof. Whereas, let's say maybe like a more conservative state like Texas, again, another border state, maybe one of those judges would be less likely just because of the political atmosphere.
That is one factor, but another factor is really, sometimes by the sheer volume, people get jaded too. People get jaded and it's like no longer like fresh, like, oh, I know this already. I heard it, been there, done that, I heard it. So, it's possibly a factor, but I wouldn't say like for sure, like California. I mean, there are people that say, oh, I think San Francisco's better than LA. I mean, that's because you may have some nice judges there that are more sympathetic. But then on the whole, really, I will always tell everyone it boils down to your own case. Because even if you have the toughest judge ever, but if you have a solid case of persecution, I would say, they can tell, they're the vibes. I can tell. And, yeah. So
Interesting.
yeah.
So I know before we had the cameras rolling, we touched on a little bit of the differences in policy between, I think as you mentioned, the Obama administration, Trump administration, now the current administration
Yes.
under Biden,
Yes.
which would basically be the same under Harris if she gets elected. So what are those differences in regards to deportation, asylum claim, or anything other related to that?
Okay, good question, and I'm glad we're going to touch upon that. So basically, it all starts with the idea that resources for removal are limited. So the limited resources, and how do you distribute your resources in an efficient way? So let's start with under the Obama administration, they started a memorandum. So it's not law, it's a memorandum, like a policy that says we are going to prioritize different levels of removability. So, of course, the number one group that is like priority number one for removal are the criminal aliens, because they're the ones causing problems to everyone. Nobody wants them here. So I totally agree with whatever news media that says if they're criminals, okay, remove them. But that doesn't mean that everybody is a criminal alien, because you have to have a criminal record and things like that. So the Obama administration started saying, look, we're going to go and look at all these factors. If you don't have a criminal record, you have long-term ties to the U.S., you have community service, you've helped law enforcement, you have U.S. citizen-born children that are, needing your help, you have elderly parents who are, permanent residents or citizens that need your help, and you're basically not a troublemaker. Then you are kind of low priority, and let's put our resources to removing the bad guys at the top. So that's where it all came in. So when it came time for court hearings, instead of saying, okay, we're going to have a full trial, we then have negotiations with the government, and it's called prosecutorial discretion, PD for short. So you can decide using your discretion. Look, she's a mom with 3 young U.S. citizen kids. She also, helps with elderly patients too, like, home care and things like that. Okay, let's just defer her removal and kind of just put the case aside for a while. And maybe when her kids become 21, some people say, oh, that's too long, but hey, you still have family here, and the child may be able to petition for the parent. So those are the kind of considerations that the government will weigh up. However, then under the Trump administration, that whole memorandum kind of got erased. So now it's like everybody's removable, regardless of whether you're a big time criminal or you're a mom with, 3 U.S. citizen kids. So that put a lot of fear. But in practicality, it was.
So does the prioritization, did that change under the Trump administration? Or was the prioritization still there, is just if they end up finding somebody who is still under a legal status, they deport them anyway? Is that what you're getting to?
So what happened then is there was no more discussion with the government. The government then closed the door and said, don't negotiate with us. So we had trouble talking to government attorneys like we did before. We used to say, hey, let's talk about PD, prosecutorial discretion. But under the 4 years, everybody just had to do their cases, presented in court. And if you lose your case, you just go up to the next level of appeal or you go home. So there was no more of like administrative closure where you kind of just put it aside for things to maybe can become better in future, like if the child became 21. So the memorandum kind of like, it became like a thing of the past.
Yeah.
Okay. And then under the Biden administration, they came up with a new memo called the Doyle Memo, Doyle. And that brought back some of that, prioritization. But instead of putting the case aside for admin closure, it became dismissal. So you just dismiss and get the case off the docket because there were still too many cases, even if you get put aside, it's still there. Like, it's just like loading up.
Right. So is that one of the loopholes in the system that people are talking about under the memorandum from the Biden administration? It basically allows people a chance to completely get dismissed in court.
Well, they do get dismissed in court, but the catch, and that's why they want to call it dismissal. If your case is dismissed, you don't have an opportunity to apply for work authorization because you no longer have a case pending. So that's why, unlike what a lot of people think, they think I'm scot-free, I'm good, because in this environment, there's, with I-9s and, all kinds of verification for work, a lot of people still want that work authorization. So if their case gets dismissed, they have no case pending and no work authorization. So
then they're just kind of stuck here without any room to make money.
Exactly. Kind of like they can't advance. Maybe they just stick to whatever, and they still have their whatever problems that having no work authorization comes with. Those who say want their cases dismissed are frequently those with married U.S. citizens because once your case gets dismissed, the court is saying, I don't want to deal with it, let U.S. immigration deal with it. So they take that court order for dismissal, bring it to to U.S. immigration, and file their green cards there.
Interesting.
But there's a but. It's only valid for those who came in with visas but have overstayed. Those who came in through the border, let nobody be mistaken. They still cannot just get a case dismissal and go and get the green card with U.S. immigration. So don't think that it's that easy for them. It's not, because the case, the legislation is built in to kind of be punitive for the ways of entry. So for those, say, they came in, without any visa, right? They didn't come in through the plane, they came in like the way it is with no visa, presented themselves, even if they're inspected. If they married a U.S. citizen, they still have to apply for a stateside waiver to waive the way that they entered. And only if that gets approved, then they can return to the home country for an immigrant visa to return. But that makes a lot of people scared because they say, oh, what if, I go there and they find something else and I can't come back in. So that's the punishment for the way they entered, So that's why every time I get a client, the first thing I ask, did you come in with a visa? And I say, show me that visa, show me that entry. And then I'll say, okay, if you've overstayed but you married a US citizen, we can process you. But if you came in through the border, you pretty much need to apply for that waiver that shows that you have extreme hardship brought upon the U.S. citizen if you're returned. So the threshold is very high for that waiver to get approved. So
Interesting.
there's millions of people stuck in that situation. They'll come to me and say, oh, I've 3 kids. My husband's a U.S. citizen. But I'll say, how did you enter? Oh, no visa. Are you willing to show me extreme hardship documents? And if you're just on regular problems like, oh, I've forgotten how to speak the language of my home country, oh, my kids, then usually that gets denied anyway. And then they get stuck here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the safety of people trying to come and immigrate, because it's almost indisputable fact now that we've seen the statistics with the open border policy, with the Biden administration's immigration policy in general. It has allowed a significant increase with human trafficking victims, especially like with children. I think our numbers are up like crazy percentage, like 400 something percentage of human trafficked like children going into sex slavery in the US. So what would be like some safer routes for immigrants to come here legally versus, just trying to join a caravan of immigrants coming through the open border?
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about the minors. So if you're an unaccompanied minor and then you get placed in immigration court, there is an application called SIGIS, Special Juvenile Immigrant Status. But that's if you're unaccompanied or you only have one parent. So if they are put in immigration court and go that route, hopefully their chances of being trafficked are less because there's the scrutiny of all the agencies deciding whether or not they get the immigrant status of being a special juvenile. As to the the volume for kids being trafficked, one way that I would say would be a safer route, which is probably only available to those maybe with some financial means. People do come in here for the last year of high school and then college. So for your very young children, there's 2 ways to adopt. There's if you're an orphan, and that comes under the Hague Convention. It's like an international treaty, the Hague, HAGUE Convention. Or if you are, you're kind of like not an orphan, but you have somebody who wants to adopt you. The adopting parents have to have legal custody over the child for 2 years and then adopt. So I would say that is safer because then you have home studies conducted by, I think it's one of the government departments, I forget the name, and then you have children's court looking over the guardianship. And then you have U.S. immigration looking through all the paperwork. Because your concern is really with the young ones, right?
Well, I mean, human trafficking in general has increased, but I mean, specifically for children, it's increased much more so.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, also, now that you mentioned trafficking, there's also a visa called the T visa, which not many people know about. T as in Tom, or T as in trafficking. So that is if, say, you were trafficked in, and then you get discovered, and you ran away or something, and then there are non-governmental organizations that help connect the victims of trafficking to government, with law enforcement, I would say law enforcement. And if they're willing to assist law enforcement to catch the guys that traffic them, that's the safer route. They can get a T visa that allows them to stay on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
Then
a T
being that,
visa,
yes,
yeah, I've never even heard of this
yes,
myself, so I'm sure a lot of other people haven't. So say for example, because recently a movie came out, a documentary,
Cry of Freedom or
The Sound of Freedom
oh,
was the
Sound of Freedom.
first one,
Okay.
but then there's a second one. It just came out.
Ah,
I can't remember it. It's like
okay.
the city. I don't want to
Oh,
quote
just
it.
like
It's about the sex trafficking industry
okay,
in
right.
Los Angeles, our
Okay.
backyard,
Oh,
basically.
wow.
That just came out, which was incredible. Like I didn't understand like exactly how terrible the trafficking industry
Oh,
is in
yeah.
LA.
Yes.
So it makes me think like now knowing that if a whether it's a child or an adult who's been trafficked in any way, shape, or form, like out here in LA,
Mm-hmm.
if they're able to escape or someone finds out they are a traffic
Yes.
victim,
Yes.
can they just go to like local law enforcement and they're able to step in and get them that T visa you talked about?
Right. Okay. So I've been a volunteer attorney, and there's a group called CAS, Coalition Against Slavery and Trafficking. Okay. So what happened was, I'll just give you an example of how they get processed and how attorneys or volunteers get into that situation. So CAS is a non-governmental organization, and they put out trainings for attorneys, and we're like, yay, let's go for a training about T visas. And they'll say sure. And for that training, would you then take on a case or two and learn hands on rather than just theory in the head? And I did. And it was very rewarding. I was not in sex trafficking department. I was in the labor exploitation. But what happened is absolute confidentiality is required. We meet in very, very confidential, places and situations. And then what happens is CAS itself, once they have determined that victim is for real, and that everything checks out in terms of the way they entered, they are the ones that go to the law enforcement and say, this is the group or this is the few that we have checked out, and everything is legit. The government, or sorry, the law enforcement is actually willing to sign off on some of the forms
Okay.
that require the law enforcement signature. And then the attorneys will help process the paperwork. And if they have a language issue, then CAS also has volunteer translators and interpreters that help with the paperwork. And then we put it all together and send it off.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. So really, if you think there's a problem like this, you might go online. I think it's not just CAS, but there are other organizations. But I know one for sure is the one that I worked with is, CAS,
Yeah, that was
CAST.
very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And they can just help everything. They even have, I think, counseling services and how to help the victims get on their feet.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one thing I do want to say, I know some people will say, well, they were trafficked, they asked for it or something, but I just want to just tell you, based on those I've seen and heard, they're usually approached by people they know well, like from the same town. And they're just told, oh, you know what? We're just going to give you a better life. Never did they say, we're going to put you in a brothel, we're going to put you in a sweatshop. So frequently they think that, oh, this is just a decent job. And then it all goes wrong because, once they arrive, everything goes wrong. So I know, like,
And then they're basically they get fear instilled in them,
oh,
saying like,
yes.
oh, if you want to try to escape,
Oh,
you're not
yes.
only going to be beaten, but you're going to get deported.
Yes,
So then it
yes.
makes them afraid to even go to the
Yes,
police.
yes. So it's like cycle of control, fear, and manipulation, and it's just very, very scary. So fortunately, those who dare to escape or fortunate enough to have friends maybe that reached out, yeah, they're the lucky ones. I have a soft spot for those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Well, that's some incredible information right there. So we've touched on asylum, illegal immigration. I want to touch on legal immigration now,
Ah, yes.
going some of the more traditional routes where anybody from like Mexico, Europe, South America, wherever, Canada, uh, what are some ways for people to get legal status here in the U.S.?
Okay, so let's talk about the two major categories. The first one is the employment-based category. So they're always called EB because employment-based, and there's employment-based
How
one
many categories are there?
to
Sorry to cut you off.
five.
Five? Okay,
Yes.
so let's
So,
start. What are the five main categories for
okay.
legal
So
status?
EB1, you are a person of extraordinary ability. So you don't need an employer. Say you are a famous actor that's won an Oscar, or you're an athlete that, been like MVP or something. Your record speaks for itself. So they usually have attorneys to put all the paperwork with all documenting all the success
Hmm.
that they've been peer reviewed, they've been empires, they have recommendation letters. So that's EB1. You're really extraordinary. Okay. So I think, some famous people you might even think, you might even have heard, but they have EB1. EB2 is if you have like advanced degrees, like you have a master's degree or 5 years of progressive work experience, you are basically like a higher functioning professional. Your employer can put that in for you. Also under EB2, they have something called National Interest Waiver, NIW, where you, in the national interest, because you are been given a government grant, say to research a very special illness, and you have made leadways in that area, so you can get EB2 for being very very talented in your field, and it being in the national interest of the United States to have you
Interesting.
remain. EB3 are like the bachelor degree holders that may have been here first under H1B. H1B is called a specialty occupation, like say you're a computer person or you're engineer in training, you are like say those with the bachelor degrees. So there are certain occupational categories that qualify somebody to get EB3, and every single category has its wait time.
Hmm.
So it doesn't mean that asylum seekers will affect theirs. So they have their own wait time.
Okay.
Okay, then EB4 are the religious workers. So you may have, say, a temple or a church that sponsors their pastors or their priests,
Hmm.
but they need to show certain criteria as well. And there's also on-site visit, just to prevent fraud. Otherwise, everybody says, I'm having somebody come over,
Hmm.
to be my pastor. So they have on-site visits. They check everything out. They check the nonprofit status of the organization. They
Hmm.
check everything. So
Yeah.
it's become kind of stringent. And then you have also EB5, that's the investment immigration. That's over $1 million in certain categories, certain areas of, they zone it every year, like certain areas that have higher unemployment areas, they want to encourage investors to invest. So you bring your
Okay.
money in, but they need to trace the money to make sure like it's not, money laundered.
Yeah, so
Like,
legal money
yes,
obtained.
yes,
So basically, a foreign citizen, like, I don't know, say they got
earned it.
successful in real estate in France
Exactly.
and they're able to prove it.
Right,
They come
right.
here and the government tells them what area to buy property in exchange for citizenship.
Well, let's put it this way. There's two ways. So there's those who choose to put in their own investment and build their own enterprise,
Hmm.
but it cannot be like just plunking it into property and that's it. No, they have to hire 10 US workers and have a business plan. They're specialists that write these business plans, do their
Hmm.
pie charts and everything to prove that they are legit. They put their money in, trace the money, currency exchange, and how they are able to fulfill the 10 work, the hiring of 10 people. Or they also have U.S. immigration approved regional centers. It could be like a building in Vegas. It could be an agricultural farm in Iowa or wherever. And these are approved projects. But the only thing is they put in their money, but they don't run the place because it's already run by someone. So the rate of return and all that is determined by how well that business does.
Okay.
So you have less control, and it really depends. If you're a business person and you want to run your own business, then okay, run your own business. If you think like, I just have surplus and it'll be nice to have resident status, I'll just do my own due diligence and put my money into that that company.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So which category would, like, say someone wants to come here on a work visa, what category would that be in?
Immigrant or non-immigrant?
To immigrate.
To immigrate, it depends on their skill set. So whether you're 1 to 5 depends on what your background is. So if you smell of money, then EB5, you go for that. If you're a religious worker, go for 4. If you're a bachelor degree and have an employer, go for that. If you have a master's and PhD, go for EB2. If you are self-petitioning because you're so famous, that's EB1. Oh, there's another category of EB1, which is the managerial transferee. So say there's a company in France that sets up a subsidiary here, and that subsidiary has done very well, and they want to transfer one of the managers here. That manager can come over also under EB1 as a permanent resident to run the parent company, or the manager can come over first for a maximum of 7 years as non-immigrant L. L is in London, L1. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's really
is there any
several categories.
jobs that don't qualify someone to immigrate to the U.S.? Like getting the work visa is one thing. So like
Yes.
working here in the U.S. legally is one thing, but to be able to have a path to citizenship from it, is there anything that is a disqualifier?
Let's put it this way. A lot of the issues have to do with while waiting for the permanent resident route, which may take up to 4 to 5 years, do you have another non-immigrant status to remain in the U.S.? So there's two things that go hand in hand. So let me give you a typical example, and then I think people will understand. So say I'm a student. I came in as an F1 international student. I did my bachelor degree. Okay, so after I finished my bachelor degree, I have 1 year of optional practical training, OPT, which I could work and find something related to my field. If I'm also a science and technology student, my 1 year can become an additional 2 years if the company is willing to be e-verified and also to write a plan for me as to how they want to train me. So this is what I mean by having a non-immigrant status. So while they have the non-immigrant status as F1 and as a practical trainee, optional practical training, the employer can start the permanent process, which involves recruitment, because you have to show that U.S. workers are unwilling or unable to do the job. It's not just like, hey, I'm going to replace you guys, which a lot of people fear. There's a process of there's 6, if you're a professional, there's 6 ways that 6 recruitment efforts. 2 Sunday paper ads in the major paper of circulation. You have to put maybe employee, a referral program, job website, search engine. So you have to show that the company tried to recruit people and were unwilling and unable before you can file something called labor certification. You're trying to ask the Department of Labor to certify that there is no U.S. worker willing or able. I've done all these ads. I put out all these recruitment efforts. I couldn't find anyone. If the Department of Labor stamps and says certified shortage, then you take that and file an immigrant petition with an adjustment of status for the worker. So all I'm saying is that all that recruitment is going on, you need to hold on to have a legal status here, because while you're waiting, if you suddenly have no status, guess what? The U.S. immigration is going to say, there's a break in your status, your non-immigrant status. I won't give you your green card.
Interesting.
So it's really not as easy as people think.
Yeah.
And your jobs are not being taken as
Right.
easily as you think.
So as
Yeah.
a business owner myself,
Yeah, sure.
say like I wanted to hire, a foreigner for
Sure.
my company,
Right.
what would I have to do?
Okay, so if you want to hire as a non-immigrant, you need to first see if you, I know you're going to ask about the skill set, okay? I'm going to talk about the unskilled soon, okay? But let's talk about the skills of bachelor degrees and above. There's a category.
Does it always have to be college, or can it be like certifications in other realms?
Okay, if you have an associate degree of 2 years, then you need 6 years of verifiable work experience in that related field. 1 year of college equals to 3 years of work.
Interesting.
But
Okay.
that employment letter has to be really detailed as to the job duties, because that employment letter is purporting to substitute 1 year of college. So that really, you really need to do a lot of, homework into all the details into that letter. So associate degree plus 2 years. Or some countries, I think you need to do a credential evaluation. Like, say, I think if you're from the UK, some degrees are 3 years, but they're jam-packed.
So there's like a lower
jam-packed.
standard for certain countries?
No. So what you do is this. Some countries, they jam-pack into 3 years. So just because it's not 4 years doesn't mean that it doesn't have the same content. So what we do is, usually if you want to hire somebody, you want to send their transcripts and diploma for credential evaluation. They have all these experts in credential evaluation. They'll put the sources of their research plus their resume as to what makes them an expert evaluator. And if that is equivalent to a 4-year degree plus the work experience or whatever, 4-year degree from a regional U.S. university, then that will be the start of what you call H-1B. H-1B is a specialty occupation that you can hire somebody for 6 years, but the catch is this. There's a quota of only 65,000 every year, and the fiscal year opens in October, and there's a registration process in March. And if you register but you don't get selected, even though you're super talented, you can't. So they did that because in the past years, 3 times the amount of applications went in. That means 65,000 times 3.
Yeah.
So U.S. immigration were taking it all in and then randomly selecting and returning them. So they got so tired of returning every year. So the last 2 years, they started a registration process. And then I think they have the computers kind of just pick someone. And then that's when you can put in your application. So if you want to hire someone, that person first needs to have that degree. The degree needs to match what you do, and you need to show that you have ability to pay the person, and that the person will be paid at a prevailing wage, so that U.S. workers will be protected and not being kicked out.
okay.
I know there's so many rules.
Interesting.
So it's not as easy as people think. And then you have to be picked in order to petition for the person. And then if the person is waiting here, you need to make sure the person has a legal status that can tie the person over till October, because the fiscal year is October. So if you break the status, then U.S. immigration will say it doesn't connect.
Interesting. So how long would the process take if, like, say I wanted to hire someone from UK, Canada? Does that take a year just to get started, or?
I would say if the registration is in March, you usually would already at this time be talking to someone, because you need to identify. Because if you only identified somebody in March, the registration window is only like 10 days.
Wow, okay.
So if you say, hey, will you work for me? And it's March 1st. By the time everything came in, 10 days may have passed, and then you have to wait for the next year.
Oh, wow.
That's
okay.
if you want H-1B. There are, I think, J-1, which are exchange visitors. It's like a special visa for a little while, like cultural exchange, where you can kind of work a little bit. So it depends. Like, say if you think like entertainment, it's just a
Yeah.
exchange, then maybe a J1. And then they also have J1 au pairs to help people have their kids taken care of on a
Yeah.
temporary basis. So really it depends. But if you're looking for 6 years and like, like consistent, like 30 to 40-hour weeks, then you might want to go with H1.
That's very cool. Well, we are at time for our episode. We went over a little bit actually, but
Okay.
that's some incredible information that you have. I
Yes.
think this will be really interesting for the
Yes,
audience.
yes.
For those watching who may be interested in your type of services, where could they find you?
Okay, so I'm located in Whittier. I have my own office, and I can put out my business card with you, or should
Yeah,
I
we,
tell you
we
my
could we
address?
could tag your
Yeah.
email, social media,
Yes,
phone
yes,
numbers in the
yes.
description section.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, guys, we'll be sure to tag all of her info in the description section below. So if you or anybody that you know may be watching who needs an immigration attorney in California, you could contact her. She's been incredible.
Oh, actually, one last word. Once you email me, I can set up a Zoom meeting. So not just California, all 50 states.
Oh, all
Yeah,
50 states.
because
Oh,
it's federal
you
law.
heard her.
Yeah.
All right.
And meeting through Zoom, right? So anywhere in the world too.
That's good to know.
Yes,
Well,
okay.
thank you so
All
much
right,
for
thank
coming
you.
on the show.
Thank you.
And for you guys watching, that has been another Mastermind Monday episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked the episode, please be sure to hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now. With that being said, see everybody next time.